Get off the plane. The words hit harder than the glares that followed. 10-year-old Lorenzo clutched his backpack eyes wide as the flight attendant pointed toward the door. "You're disrupting the flight," she barked while passengers stared in uneasy silence. He hadn't shouted, hadn't misbehaved, he'd only reached for a book. But in those 7 humiliating minutes, a child's quiet confusion would ignite a national storm. What Stephanie didn't know was that the boy she just threw out would soon appear on every news channel in America, and that her single act of cruelty would ground an entire airline. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Lorenzo clutched his backpack tightly as he and his Aunt Belinda walked through the bustling airport. The 10-year-old's eyes darted nervously from one gate to another, taking in the sea of unfamiliar faces rushing by. "You okay, buddy?" Belinda asked. Placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, Lorenzo nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I'm just a little nervous." Belinda squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "That's totally normal. Remember, we're going to have a great time visiting your dad." As they made their way to their gate, Lorenzo couldn't help but notice how different he and Belinda looked compared to the other passengers his aunt wore, comfortable jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. Her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun. Lorenzo himself was dressed in his favorite superhero shirt and well-worn sneakers. Many of the other travelers wore crisp business suits or stylish dresses. Lorenzo felt a twinge of self-consciousness as he caught a few curious glances directed their way. "Aunt Belinda," he whispered, tugging on her sleeve. "Do you think we should have dressed up more?" Belinda looked down at him, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled. "Oh, sweetie, there's no dress code for flying. We're comfortable, and that's what matters for a long trip." Lorenzo nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The past few months had been a whirlwind of core rooms and tense conversations between his parents. This trip felt like a chance for things to finally calm down, but the knot in his stomach wouldn't go away as they settled into the plastic chairs at their gate. Belinda noticed Lorenzo's furrowed brow. "What's on your mind, kiddo?" Lorenzo hesitated, then spoke softly. "I'm excited to see Dad, but what if things are weird? What if he's different now?" Belinda's heart ached deep for her nephew. She pulled him close, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Your Dad loves you so much, Lorenzo. No matter what's happened, that will never change. This visit is a chance for you two to spend time together and have fun." Lorenzo leaned into his aunt's embrace, feeling some of his worry melt away. He was so grateful to have her by his side. As the minutes ticked by, more passengers gathered at the gate. Lorenzo watched as a little girl in a frilly dress twirled for her smiling parents, and an older couple, both in pressed slacks and blazers, sat nearby, reading newspapers. "Flight 372 to Chicago. Will begin boarding in 15 minutes, a voice announced over the loudspeaker. Lorenzo's heart began to race. This was really happening. He was about to board a plane and fly across the country to see his dad. Belinda noticed his quickened breathing and gave his hand a squeeze. Deep breaths. "Lorenzo, we're in this together. Okay?" He nodded, focusing on taking slow, steady breaths just like his aunt had taught him. As they waited for their boarding group to be called, Lorenzo tried to imagine the adventures that lay ahead despite his nerves. A tiny spark of excitement began to grow in his chest as their boarding group was called Lorenzo, and Belinda joined the line of passengers making their way onto the plane. Lorenzo's heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness as they shuffled down the narrow aisle. "Here we are," Belinda said softly, pointing to their row. "You can have the window seat if you'd like, buddy." Lorenzo's eyes lit up. "Really? Thanks, Aunt Belinda." He slid into the seat, pressing his face against the small oval window. The world outside looked so different from up here. The baggage carts zipping around looked like toys, and the runway stretched out endlessly. Belinda settled into the middle seat, giving Lorenzo a reassuring pat on the knee as she began organizing their belongings, tucking bags under seats and sorting out snacks. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes took the aisle seat next to them. "Hello there," the woman said with a warm smile. "Looks like we'll be neighbors for this flight." Lorenzo, remembering his manners, turned to her with a shy smile. "Hi, I'm Lorenzo. This is my first time flying." The woman's eyes crinkled with delight as that. "So well, you're in for quite an adventure, young man. I'm Mrs. Willow," as Belinda continued getting everything settled. Lorenzo engaged in polite conversation with Mrs. Willow. His nervousness began to fade as they chatted about his upcoming visit with his dad and her trip to see her grandchildren. "You know," Mrs. Willow said, leaning in conspiratorially, "I still get butterflies in my tummy every time I fly, even after all these years." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "Really, I thought it was just me." Mrs. Willow chuckled. "Oh, no, dear. It's perfectly normal, but just think in a few hours you'll be with your father. Won't that be wonderful?" Lorenzo nodded eagerly, a spark of excitement pushing aside some of his anxiety. Meanwhile, further down the aisle, flight attendant Stephanie was helping passengers stow their carry-on luggage as she worked. Her gaze kept drifting back to Lorenzo and Belinda. She took in their casual attire and Belinda's messy hair, her lips pursing slightly, probably using buddy passes. Stephanie muttered under her breath, assuming they were flying on discounted tickets meant for airline employees, friends, and family. She had dealt with her fair share of inexperienced travelers, and something about this pair set her on edge as Stephanie approached their row. She overheard Lorenzo's excited chatter with Mrs. Willow. She noticed Belinda's wrinkled T-shirt and the worn backpack stuffed under the seat. Her eyes narrowed, making snap judgments about their so-economic status based solely on appearances. "Can I help you with anything?" Stephanie asked, her tone polite, but lacking warmth. Belinda looked up, offering a friendly smile. "No, thank you. I think we're all set." Stephanie nodded curtly and moved on, but she made a mental note to keep an eye on this particular row. In her experience, passengers who looked out of place often caused the most trouble as the plane prepared for takeoff. Lorenzo fidgeted in his seat. He suddenly remembered something important in his backpack. "Aunt Belinda," he whispered, "I forgot to take out my book. Can I get it real quick?" Belinda nodded. "Of course, sweetie, just be careful." Lorenzo carefully unbuckled his seat belt and stood up. He reached for his backpack in the overhead compartment, standing on his tiptoes to reach it. Stephanie, who had been watching their row closely, saw Lorenzo stand up. Her face tightened with annoyance. She marched over her heels, clicking sharply against the floor. "Sit down immediately," she snapped at Lorenzo. "You're being disruptive." Lorenzo froze his eyes wide with shock. He looked at Belinda, unsure of what to do. Belinda placed a gentle hand on Lorenzo's arm. "It's okay, honey, sit down for now." She then turned to Stephanie, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sorry, but Lorenzo was just trying to get his book out before takeoff. He wasn't." "I don't want to hear excuses," Stephanie cut her off, her voice rising. "You need to control your child. This kind of behavior is unacceptable." Belinda took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Ma'am, I understand you have a job to do, but there's no need to speak to us this way." Lorenzo was simply, "Do not tell me how to do my job." Stephanie interrupted again, her tone growing increasingly hostile. "If you can't follow simple instruction, maybe you shouldn't be flying." Other passengers began to turn in their seats, curious about the commotion. Some exchanged worried glances, while others craned their necks to get a better view. Mrs. Willow, still seated next to them, spoke up out. "Dear," she said to Stephanie, "I don't think there's any need for—" "Please stay out of this, ma'am," Stephanie said curtly, not even looking at Mrs. Willow. Lorenzo sank lower in his seat, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. He could feel the stares of other passengers and wished he could disappear. Belinda put her arm around Lorenzo, pulling him close. She looked up at Stephanie, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and indignation. "I don't understand why you're treating us this way. We've done nothing wrong." Stephanie's nostrils flared. I've had enough of your attitude. I'm going to have to speak with the captain about this. As Stephanie stormed off towards the front of the plane, a tense silence fell over their section. Other passengers whispered among themselves, some shooting sympathetic looks at Lorenzo and Belinda, while others seemed unsure of what to make of the situation. Lorenzo looked up at his aunt, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Aunt Belinda. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Belinda hugged him tighter, her voice soft but strong. "You didn't do anything wrong, Lorenzo. Sometimes people make unfair judgments, but that's not your fault. We'll get through this together." As Stephanie returned from speaking with the captain, her face was set in a hard, determined expression. She marched directly to Lorenzo and Belinda's row, her eyes blazing with misplaced authority. "I've spoken with the captain," she announced loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "You two need to leave the plane immediately. You're disturbing other passengers, and we can't allow this behavior to continue." Belinda's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? That's absurd. We haven't done anything wrong." Lorenzo looked up at his aunt, his lower lip trembling. "Aunt Belinda, what's happening?" Stephanie's voice grew even sharper. "I won't repeat myself. Gather your belongings and exit the aircraft now, or I'll be forced to call security." Belinda stood up, her voice steady but filled with indignation. "This is completely unacceptable. We have every right to be on this flight. We've done nothing to warrant this treatment." Other passengers began to murmur, some looking confused, others concerned. Mrs. Willow, still seated next to them, spoke up again. "Now wait just a minute. These two haven't done anything wrong. I've been sitting right here the whole time." Stephanie ignored Mrs. Willow's protest. "Security has already been notified. They'll be here shortly to escort you off if you don't leave willingly." Lorenzo's eyes filled with tears. He clutched Belinda's hand tightly, his voice barely a whisper. "Aunt Belinda, I'm scared. What did we do wrong?" Belinda knelt down beside Lorenzo, her voice gentle but firm. "We didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes people make unfair judgments, but we're going to stand up for ourselves." Just then, two security officers appeared at the front of the plane. They made their way down the aisle, their presence causing a hush to fall over the cabin. "Ma'am," one of the officers addressed Belinda, "we've been asked to escort you and the boy off the plane. Please come with us." Belinda stood her ground, her voice clear and controlled. "This is discrimination. We have done nothing to warrant removal from this flight." Despite Belinda's protests, the security officers insisted they leave. Lorenzo clung to his aunt, tears now streaming down his face. Belinda wrapped her arm protectively around him as they gathered their belongings as they were led down the aisle. The other passengers watched in stunned silence. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Others whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Mrs. Willow called out, her voice quavering with emotion. "This isn't right. They didn't do anything." But her words fell on deaf ears as Lorenzo and Belinda were escorted off the plane, leaving behind a cabin full of bewildered passengers and an atmosphere thick with tension. Lorenzo and Belinda sat side by side at the gate, their minds still reeling from what had just happened. The bustling airport around them seemed distant. As if they were in a bubble of disbelief, Lorenzo's small frame shook slightly, his eyes red and puffy from crying. Belinda, her face a mask of composure, took a deep breath and squeezed her nephew's hand. "It's going to be okay, Lorenzo," she said. Softly, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside her. "We're going to make this right?" Lorenzo looked up at his aunt, his voice trembling. "Why did they do that to us? Aunt Belinda, we didn't do anything wrong." Belinda's heart ached at the confusion and hurt in Lorenzo's eyes. She pulled him close, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "You're right, sweetheart. We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people make unfair judgments based on how others look or dress. It's not right, and we're not going to let them get away with it." As Lorenzo leaned into her, "Embrace." Belinda's mind raced. She knew they needed to take action, and quickly, with a determined set to her jaw. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Lorenzo, I need to make an important call. Can you stay right here with our bags for a moment? Lorenzo nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Belinda stood up, walking a few steps away for some privacy, but keeping Lorenzo in her sight, she scrolled through her contacts, finding the number she needed. Taking another deep breath, she pressed the call button after a few. Rings, a familiar voice answered Mr. Smith. This is Belinda. I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but something urgent has come up. Her voice was calm and professional despite the emotions swirling inside her as Belinda explained the situation to her high-profile client, who she knew was a major investor in the airline line. Lorenzo watched her intently. He could see the fire in her eyes, the way her free hand gestured emphatically as she spoke, even though he couldn't hear the whole conversation. He could tell his aunt was fighting for them. A mix of emotions churned in Lorenzo's stomach. He felt angry at how they had been treated, confused about why it had happened, and embarrassed that everyone on the plane had seen them being escorted off. But as he watched his aunt, a small spark of hope began to grow in his chest. When Belinda finished her call, she returned to Lorenzo's side, her face set with determination. Mr. Smith is going to make some calls right away. He was furious when I told him what happened. Lorenzo looked up at her, his eyes wide. What's going to happen now? Aunt Belinda. Belinda sat down next to him, taking his hand in hers. We're going to stand up for ourselves, Lorenzo. What happened to us was wrong, and we're not going to let them brush it under the rug. It might be a little scary, but remember, we're doing this so that no one else has to go through what we just did. Lorenzo nodded slowly, feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve. He trusted his aunt, and if she said they were doing the right thing, he believed her within minutes of Belinda's call. A well-dressed man in a crisp suit hurried towards them. His name tag identified him as Mr. Johnson, the airline's manager. His face was etched with concern as he approached Lorenzo and Belinda. Miss Williams. Mr. Lorenzo, he said, slightly out of breath, I can't express how deeply sorry we are for this terrible incident. Please allow me to make this right. Belinda stood up, her posture straight and her gaze steady. Lorenzo remained seated. Watching the exchange with wide eyes, Mr. Johnson continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. We'd like to offer you both upgraded seats in first class on our next flight to your destination. It leaves in an hour, and we'll ensure you have the most comfortable journey possible. Belinda's expression remained neutral. Mr. Johnson, while I appreciate your quick response, I hope you understand that this situation goes far beyond a simple inconvenience. The manager nodded earnestly. Of course, we take discrimination very seriously. I assure you there will be a full investigation and the staff involved will face disciplinary action. Lorenzo looked up at his aunt, noticing the firm set of her jaw. He knew that look. It was the same one she wore in the courtroom when she was fighting for what was right. Mr. Johnson, Belinda said, her voice calm but resolute. What happened to us today is not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger problem that needs to be addressed. While we appreciate the offer of upgraded seats, it doesn't erase the humiliation and distress my nephew and I experienced. The manager's face fell, realizing that this wouldn't be resolved with a simple apology and upgrade. Belinda continued, I'm a civil rights attorney, and I've seen far too many cases like this. It's time for real change. I intend to take legal action, not just for us, but for everyone who has faced similar discrimination. Lorenzo felt a mix of pride and nervousness as he listened to his aunt. He knew she was doing the right thing, but the thought of being part of a legal battle was daunting. Mr. Johnson paled slightly. Miss Williams, I assure you we want to make this right. Perhaps we could discuss this further in my office. We're committed to improving our policies and training. Belinda nodded, but her resolve didn't waver. I'm willing to have that conversation, Mr. Johnson, but understand that this goes beyond just your airline. It's about setting a precedent and making sure no one else has to go through what we did. Today, as the adults continued their discussion, Lorenzo sat quietly, taking it all in. He felt a strange mix of emotions, fear about what was to come, but also a growing sense of determination. His aunt was standing up for what was right, and he realized that he wanted to be brave like her. As Lorenzo and Belinda waited for their next flight, they remained unaware of the storm brewing outside the airport walls in the bustling terminal. A passenger named Sarah, who had witnessed the shocking incident, sat quietly in a corner, her fingers flying over her phone screen. Sarah had recorded the entire scene from Stephanie's hostile approach to Lorenzo and Belinda being escorted off the plane. With a deep frown, she uploaded the video to her social media accounts, adding a heartfelt caption about the injustice she had witnessed. "I can't believe what I just saw," she wrote. "This poor boy and his aunt were treated so unfairly. We can't let this slide." Within minutes, the video began to spread like wildfire. People shared it with friends and family, expressing their outrage in the comments. Hashtags like "Justice for Lorenzo" and "Airline Discrimination" started trending as the hours ticked by. The video's view count skyrocketed. Social media influencers and celebrities began sharing it, amplifying its reach. People from all walks of life were commenting their words, a mix of anger, disbelief, and calls for action. "This is absolutely disgusting." One user wrote, "How can they treat a child like that? We need to boycott this airline until they make real changes." Another demanded the viral nature of the video caught the attention of news outlets. Local stations were the first to pick up the story, but it quickly spread to national networks anchors. And reporters began discussing the incident, bringing in experts to talk about racial profiling and discrimination in the travel industry. This video has sparked a nationwide conversation about bias in air travel. A news anchor reported the airline is facing intense scrutiny and calls for reform. Meanwhile, Lorenzo and Belinda sat in the airport lounge, completely oblivious to the firestorm their experience had ignited. Lorenzo was curled up in a comfortable chair, reading a book Belinda had bought him from the airport gift shop. Belinda sat beside him, her laptop open as she worked on drafting a formal complaint against the airline. They were focused on their immediate next steps, making it to their destination, and beginning the legal process. Neither of them had any idea that millions of people across the country were now invested in their story, demanding justice on their behalf as they prepared to board their next flight. Lorenzo looked up at his aunt. "Do you think anything will really change because of what happened to us?" he asked softly. Belinda smiled gently at her nephew, patting his hand. "I hope so, Lorenzo. Sometimes it takes one voice to start a chorus. We're going to do our best to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Little did they know their voice had already become a chorus, echoing across the nation. As Lorenzo and Belinda approached the gate for their next flight, they noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere around them. The airline staff seemed unusually attentive, offering warm smiles and going out of their way to assist them. Even other passengers cast curious glances their way, some offering sympathetic nods. Aunt Belinda Lorenzo whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Why is everyone being so nice to us?" Belinda patted his hand reassuringly. "I'm not sure, sweetie. Maybe they just want to make up for what happened earlier." As they settled into their first-class seats, Belinda's phone began to buzz incessantly. She frowned, pulling it out to see a flood of notifications and missed calls. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the messages. "Oh my!" She breathed, her voice barely audible. Lorenzo looked up from his book, concern etched on his young face. "What's wrong?" Belinda turned to him, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "It seems someone recorded what happened to us on the other flight. The video has gone viral. Lorenzo, it's all over the internet and even on the news." Lorenzo's eyes grew round. "Really, everyone knows about it?" As if on cue, a flight attendant approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Lorenzo, Miss Belinda, is there anything I can get for you? We want to ensure your flight is as comfortable as possible." Lorenzo shifted in his seat, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "No, thank you." He mumbled, his cheeks flushing after the attendant left. Belinda's phone rang. She answered it, listening intently for a few moments before hanging up. "That was my colleague," she explained to Lorenzo. He says the video has millions of views. People are outraged about how we were treated. There are hashtags trending about us, and news channel Chanel's want to interview us when we land. Lorenzo's stomach did a flip. He felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride that people cared about what happened to them, but also a twinge of anxiety about all the attention. What does this mean, Aunt Belinda? He asked, his voice small. Belinda put her arm around him, giving him a gentle squeeze. It means we have a chance to make a real difference. Lorenzo, what happened to us wasn't right, and now we have the opportunity to speak up and maybe prevent it from happening to others. Lorenzo nodded slowly. Processing this information, he felt overwhelmed but also determined. I want to help, he said, his voice growing stronger. I don't want anyone else to feel the way we did. Belinda smiled proudly at her nephew. That's very brave of you, Lorenzo. We'll face this together, okay? As the plane began to taxi, Lorenzo looked out the window, his mind swirling with thoughts about what awaited them when they landed. He knew things were about to change, and while it scared him a little, he felt ready to face whatever came next as the plane soared through the sky. Lorenzo couldn't help but notice the stark difference in how they were being treated. The flight attendants were all smiles, offering extra pillows, and frequently checking if they needed anything. Even the other passengers seemed friendlier, with some offering kind words or understanding nods. Lorenzo fidgeted in his plush first-class seat, feeling a mix of comfort and unease. He leaned over to Belinda, who was reviewing some documents on her tablet. Aunt Belinda, he whispered, why did it take all of this for them to be nice? Shouldn't they have been nice from the beginning? Belinda nodded, a sad smile on her face. You're absolutely right, Lorenzo. They should have. It's not fair that it took all this attention for us to be treated with respect. Lorenzo looked down at his hands, his young mind grappling with the injustice of it all. It doesn't feel right, he said softly. I'm glad people care now, but it's like they only care because everyone else does. Belinda reached out and took Lorenzo's hand in hers. I understand how you feel, sweetie. It's a complicated situation. But you know what? This is exactly why what we're doing is so important. Lorenzo looked up, his eyes questioning. What do you mean by speaking up and pushing for accountability? We helping to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Belinda explained. We're showing people that it's not okay to treat others unfairly, no matter who they are or what they look like. Lorenzo nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So we're doing the right thing? Absolutely. Belinda affirmed, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. It might feel uncomfortable sometimes, and it might be hard, but we're standing up for what's right. And that's always important, even when it's not easy. Lorenzo sat back in his seat, a small smile forming on his face. He still felt conflicted about the sudden change in how they were being treated, but his aunt's words had reassured him they were doing something important, something that could help others. And even though it was a big responsibility, Lorenzo felt proud to be a part of it, as Lorenzo and Belinda settled into their hotel room after the flight. Belinda's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and her eyes widened. Lorenzo, honey, can you give me a moment? I need to take this call, she said, stepping out onto the balcony. Lorenzo nodded, his curiosity piqued. He watched through the glass door as his aunt's face lit up with excitement. She paced back and forth, nodding and gesturing animatedly as she spoke. When Belinda finally came back inside, her eyes were shining. Lorenzo, you won't believe who just called, she said, sitting down next to him on the bed. It was the National Civil Rights Coalition. They want to help us with our case. Lorenzo's eyebrows shot up. Really? What does that mean? Belinda took a deep breath, trying to contain her excitement. It means they want to support us in making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. They want to use our story to start a bigger conversation about discrimination in air travel. As Belinda explained more about the organization's offer, Lorenzo felt a mix of emotions swirling in his chest. On one hand, he was proud that their experience could help others, but on the other hand, the idea of being in the spotlight made his stomach churn. What do you think, Lorenzo? Belinda asked, noticing his silence. Isn't this amazing? Lorenzo fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. I don't know, Aunt Belinda. It sounds important, but... He trailed off, unsure how to express his feelings. Belinda's excitement dimmed as she noticed Lorenzo's discomfort. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. What's wrong, sweetie? You can tell me. Lorenzo took a deep breath. It's just, I'm scared. What if people recognize us on the street? What if they say mean things about us online? I don't know if I can handle all that attention. Belinda's face softened with understanding. She pulled Lorenzo into a hug. Oh, honey, I understand it can be scary to be in the public eye like this, but remember, we're doing this for a good reason. We're standing up for what's right. Lorenzo nodded against her shoulder, but his worry didn't disappear. I know, but can't. We help without being on TV or in the news. Belinda pulled back to look Lorenzo in the eyes. We'll do whatever you're comfortable with, okay? If you don't want to be in front of cameras or do interviews, we won't. Your feelings matter most in this. Lorenzo felt a wave of relief wash over him. Really? We don't have to do everything. They ask absolutely not. Belinda assured him. We'll set boundaries and make sure you feel safe and comfortable every step of the way. How does that sound? A small smile crept onto Lorenzo's face. That sounds better. Thanks, Aunt Belinda. Belinda hugged him again, feeling proud of her nephew's bravery and honesty. We're in this together, Lorenzo. We'll make a difference, but we'll do it on our terms. The morning sun streamed through the hotel room curtains as Lorenzo stirred from his sleep. Today was the day he'd finally see his dad after so long. His heart raced with excitement and nervousness. As he got ready when they arrived at the agreed meeting spot, Lorenzo's face lit up. At the sight of his father, he cried out, running into his open arms. Lorenzo, my boy! His father exclaimed, hugging him tightly. I've missed you so much. As they sat down for breakfast, Lorenzo's dad noticed a change in his son. You seem different. Lorenzo is everything. Okay? Lorenzo took a deep breath and began to share what had happened on the plane. His words tumbled out a mix of anger and hurt as he recounted the discrimination he and Aunt Belinda had faced his father's face. Face darkened with concern and anger. I can't believe they treated you like that, he said, shaking his head. But I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. Lorenzo nodded, then hesitated. But, Dad, there's more. The video of what happened. It's all over the internet now. People are talking about us everywhere. His father's eyes widened. Really? That must be overwhelming for you. It is, Lorenzo admitted. I don't know how to handle all this attention. Meanwhile, Belinda was busy in her hotel room speaking with lawyers and civil rights advocates. She filed a formal complaint against the airline citing racial discrimination and wrongful ejection. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications and calls from reporters seeking interviews as the day wore on. Lorenzo returned to the hotel, his head spinning from all that was happening. He found Belinda in deep conversation with someone on the phone when she hung up. She turned to Lorenzo with a gentle smile. How are you holding up, sweetie? Lorenzo shrugged his eyes downcast. I don't know, Aunt Belinda. It's all so much. People want to talk to us. They want to hear our story, but I'm scared. Belinda sat beside him, putting an arm around his shoulders. I know it's scary, Lorenzo, but remember what we talked about. You have a voice and it's powerful. You can use it to make a real difference. Lorenzo looked up at her, his eyes uncertain. But how I'm just a kid sometimes, Belinda said softly. The most important voices are the ones we least expect. Your story, your experience, it matters, it can help prevent this from happening to other people. Lorenzo thought about this for a moment. Do you really think I can make a difference? Belinda nodded, her eyes shining with pride. I know you can. But remember, we'll only do what you're comfortable with. Your well-being comes first. Lorenzo took a deep breath, feeling a small spark of courage ignite within him. Okay, he said, his voice growing stronger. I think I want to try. As the days passed, Lorenzo and Belinda found themselves at the center of a growing movement with the help of civil rights organizations and their legal team. They launched an online campaign called Fly Fair to raise awareness about racial discrimination in air travel. Lorenzo sat at the hotel desk, his small hands hovering over the keyboard. He took a deep breath and began typing his story, sharing the hurt and confusion he felt that day on the plane. Belinda watched him with pride, offering gentle encouragement. "You're doing great, Lorenzo," she said softly. "Your words will help." Others feel brave enough to speak up too as soon as they post Lorenzo's story. Responses began pouring in. People from all walks of life shared their own experiences of unfair treatment, while traveling the hashtag #JeerFlyAir started trending on social media platforms one evening as they scrolled through the messages. Lorenzo's eyes widened. "Aunt Belinda, look at all these stories. I had no idea so many people went through stuff like this." Belinda nodded, her face serious. "It's more common than most people realize, sweetie. That's why what we're doing is so important." The campaign grew rapidly. News outlets picked up the story, featuring interviews with Lorenzo and Belinda. They appeared on morning shows, their faces becoming familiar to millions across the country. At first, Lorenzo felt nervous in front of the cameras. His palms would sweat and his voice would shake. But with each interview, he grew more confident. He found strength in knowing that his words were making a difference one day after a particularly impactful interview. Lorenzo turned to Belinda. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about using my voice," he said thoughtfully. "It feels big, like I'm carrying something really important." Belinda smiled her eyes. "Misty, that's exactly it, Lorenzo. You're carrying the hopes and experiences of so many people. It's a big responsibility, but you're handling it beautifully." As the campaign continued to gain traction, Lorenzo began to feel the weight of his new role. He received messages from kids his age who looked up to him, thanking him for speaking out. Adults shared how his bravery inspired them to confront discrimination in their own lives one night, as they prepared for bed. Lorenzo looked at Belinda with a mix of wonder and concern. "Aunt Belinda, I never thought I'd be what did that reporter call me? A public figure. It's kind of scary." Belinda sat on the edge of his bed, taking his hand. "It can be scary, sweetie, but remember, you're not alone in this. We're doing this together, and we have a whole community supporting us." Lorenzo nodded. Feeling a little better as he drifted off to sleep, he thought about all the people who had shared their stories. He felt a surge of determination. Even though it was a big responsibility, he knew that what they were doing was making a real difference. As the Fly Air campaign gained momentum, Lorenzo received an unexpected invitation. The principal of a local middle school asked if he would speak to their students about his experience and the importance of standing up for justice. When Belinda told him about the invitation, Lorenzo's eyes widened. "Me speak at a school?" he asked, his voice quivering slightly. Belinda nodded, smiling encouragingly. "You've been doing such a great job with the interviews, Lorenzo. This is a chance to share your story with kids your own age." Lorenzo bit his lip. Considering the thought of standing in front of a crowd of students made his stomach churn, but he knew how important their message was. After a moment, he took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The day of the speech arrived all too quickly as they walked into the school auditorium. Lorenzo's palms were sweaty. He gripped Belinda's hand tightly, his heart racing. "You've got this, sweetie," Belinda whispered, giving his hand a squeeze. Lorenzo stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the sea of young faces. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice shaky at first. "Hi, I'm Lorenzo. He started a few weeks ago. I was just a regular kid like you." But then something happened that changed everything. As Lorenzo recounted the incident on the plane, his voice grew stronger. He described how it felt to be treated unfairly, the confusion and hurt he experienced. It wasn't right. He said, his voice clear and firm now. "And I realized that staying quiet about it wouldn't help anyone. So we decided to speak up." Lorenzo went on to explain the Fly Air campaign and why it was so important. "Fighting for what's right isn't always easy," he admitted. Sometimes it's scary, but when we stand up against unfairness, we can make a real difference," as he spoke. Lorenzo noticed the students leaning forward in their seats, hanging on his every word. Their eyes were wide, and some even nodded along with what he was saying. "You don't have to be a grown-up to stand up for what's right." Lorenzo continued, feeling a surge of confidence. "Each one of us can make a difference. No matter how young we are." When Lorenzo finished his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood up clapping and cheering. Some even had tears in their eyes as he stepped away from the microphone. Lorenzo felt a warmth spreading through his chest. He had done it. He had shared his story and touched the hearts of these students. Belinda wrapped him in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lorenzo hugged her back, feeling a new sense of purpose. He realized that his voice, once small and hesitant, now had the power to inspire others and create change, and, for the first time since this journey began, he felt truly ready to embrace his role in the fight for justice as Lorenzo's story continued to gain attention, his inbox filled with messages of support and invitations to various events. One day, a particularly special email arrived. It was an invitation to speak at the National Youth Empowerment Conference, a prestigious gathering of young activists from across the country. When Belinda shared the news with Lorenzo, his eyes lit up with excitement. "Wow, really?" he exclaimed, his voice a mix of disbelief and joy. Belinda nodded, beaming with pride. "They want you to be one of the keynote speakers. Lorenzo, you'll be sharing the stage with other young activists who are making a difference in their communities." Lorenzo's initial excitement was quickly followed by a wave of nervousness. He fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, his brow furrowing. "But what if I'm not ready for something that big?" he asked softly. Belinda sat down next to him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to feel nervous. Sweetie, this is a big step. But remember how far you've come already. You've touched so many lives with your story." Lorenzo nodded slowly, thinking about the school speech and all the messages they'd received from people who had been inspired by their campaign. He felt a swell of PR pride, but also a heavy sense of responsibility. "I'm proud of what we've done," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "But this feels so much bigger. There will be so many important people there. What if I mess up?" Belinda pulled him into a gentle hug. "You won't mess up, Lorenzo. You'll be speaking from your heart just like you've been doing all along. That's what makes your message so powerful." As the days passed and the conference drew nearer, Lorenzo threw himself into preparation. He practiced his speech, refined his message, and learned about the other young activists he would be meeting. But despite his efforts, the pressure continued to mount one evening as he sat at his desk reviewing his notes. Lorenzo felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. He was proud of the work they had done with the Fly Fair campaign, but he couldn't help wondering if they were truly ready for the challenges that lay ahead. The conference would bring new opportunities, but also new scrutiny and responsibilities. Lorenzo took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He knew their cause was important, that their message needed to be heard. But as he looked at the conference schedule filled with the names of accomplished young activists, he couldn't help but feel small in comparison. As Lorenzo prepared for the upcoming conference, a storm was brewing behind the scenes. One afternoon, Belinda received a call that would shake their world. "Lorenzo," Belinda called out, her voice tight with worry. "Can you come here for a moment?" Lorenzo hurried to the living room where Belinda sat on the couch, her face pale. "What's wrong, Aunt Belinda?" Belinda took a deep breath. "I just got off the phone with our lawyer. The Flight Attendants Union has filed a countersuit against us." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "A countersuit? What does that mean?" "It means they're suing us back," Belinda explained gently. "They're saying we damaged their reputation, especially Stephanie's with the viral video." Lorenzo felt his stomach drop. "But we didn't do anything wrong. We just told the truth about what happened." Belinda nodded, pulling Lorenzo close. I know, sweetie, but they're claiming the video unfairly hurt innocent employees who weren't involved. As the news sank in, Lorenzo felt a mix of anger and fear. Can they do that? Can they just make our campaign go away? Belinda sighed. They can't make our message go away, but this legal challenge could make things much harder for us. We're up against some powerful interests. Now Lorenzo slumped onto the couch, his mind racing all the progress they'd made, all the people they'd inspired. It felt like it was slipping away. What are we going to do? He asked, his voice small. Belinda squeezed his hand. We're going to fight Lorenzo. We've come too far to give up now. But I won't lie to you. This is going to be tough. As the days passed, the reality of their situation became clearer. The countersuit threatened to drain their resources and energy. Some supporters began to distance themselves, afraid of getting caught in the legal crossfire. Lorenzo watched as Belinda spent hours on the phone with lawyers and activists trying to find a way forward. He felt helpless, unsure of how he could contribute in the face of such a big challenge one evening. As they sat at the kitchen table reviewing their options, Lorenzo voiced his fears. What if we lose everything? Aunt Belinda, what if all our work was for nothing? Belinda looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. Lorenzo, listened to me no matter what happens with this lawsuit. The truth of our experience doesn't change the people we've inspired, the conversations we've started. That impact is real. We might face setbacks, but our message is too important to be silenced. Lorenzo nodded, feeling a spark of hope. Despite the uncertainty, they had faced challenges before, and they would face this one too. Together, Lorenzo sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, the weight of the countersuit pressed down on him, making his shoulders slump. He felt like all their hard work was crumbling around them. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Aunt Belinda, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Belinda looked up from the stack of legal papers she'd been reviewing. Her eyes softened as she saw the pain etched on her nephew's face. She set down her pen and moved to sit beside him. Oh, Lorenzo, she said gently, putting an arm around his shoulders. I know this feels overwhelming right now. Lorenzo nodded, fighting back tears. Everything we've done. It feels like it's all falling apart. What if we lose? What if we can't keep fighting? Belinda took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Lorenzo, look at me, she said, waiting until he met her. Justice is never easy. It's a long, hard road, and sometimes it feels like we're taking 2 steps back for every step forward, but that doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing. Lorenzo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But what if we're not strong enough? Belinda smiled, a fierce determination in her eyes. We are strong enough because we're fighting for what's right, and we're not alone. Remember all the people who've shared their stories because of us. They're counting on us to keep going. As Belinda's words sank in, Lorenzo felt a small spark of hope reignite in his chest. He sat up a little straighter, drawing strength from his aunt's unwavering resolve. You're right, he said, his voice growing stronger. We can't give up now. Not after everything we've been through. Belinda nodded, squeezing his shoulder. That's my brave boy. Now let's look at these papers together. We've got a legal battle to prepare for over the next few days. Lorenzo and Belinda threw themselves into preparing for the fight ahead. They pored over documents, spoke with their lawyers, and reached out to their supporters for help. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Lorenzo felt overwhelmed, but each time he faltered, Belinda was there to remind him of the importance of their cause. As the legal battle intensified, Lorenzo and Belinda found themselves working tirelessly to prepare their case. They spent long hours poring over documents and consulting with their lawyers. The weight of the countersuit hung heavy over them, but they refused to give up one evening as they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of papers. Belinda's phone buzzed. She picked it up, her eyes widening as she read the message. "Loren, oh," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "You won't believe this. Lorenzo looked up from his homework, curiosity replacing the worry on his face. "What is it?" "Aunt Belinda, remember the elderly woman who sat next to us on the flight?" Belinda asked, her eyes shining. "She's reached out to our lawyers. She wants to testify about what happened." Lorenzo's jaw dropped. "Really? She's gonna help us?" Belinda nodded, scrolling through her phone, and she's not the only one. 3 other passengers have come forward too. They all want to speak up about the discrimination they witnessed. Lorenzo felt a surge of hope rush through him. They were silent before what made them change their minds. Sometimes, Belinda explained gently, people need time to find their courage they've seen. How brave you've been, Lorenzo. You've inspired them to do the right thing. As the news sank in, Lorenzo felt a warmth spread through his chest. He hadn't realized how much their fight had touched others. The thought that he had inspired people to stand up for what was right made him feel both proud and humbled over the next few days. More passengers reached out. Each new message brought fresh hope and determination to Lorenzo and Belinda. They listened to stories of how the incident had affected these witnesses, how they had struggled with guilt over not speaking up sooner, and how they now felt compelled to make things right one afternoon as they prepared to meet with their lawyers. Lorenzo turned to Belinda. "I was ready to give up," he admitted softly, "but now, knowing we're not alone, I feel like we can really make a difference." Belinda smiled, pulling him into a tight hug. "We already have, Lorenzo. We already have." As the days turned into weeks, Belinda threw herself into building their case. She spent countless hours huddled with her legal team, poring over documents and strategizing their approach. The conference room became their second home, filled with the steady hum of voices and the rustle of papers. Lorenzo watched in awe as his aunt worked tirelessly, her determination never wavering. He'd always known she was strong, but seeing her in action filled him with a new sense of admiration. "Aunt Belinda," he said one evening as they packed up to leave, "you're amazing. How do you keep going?" Belinda smiled, ruffling his hair affectionately. "It's easy. When you're fighting for what's right, kiddo, and we've got a lot of people counting on us now." She wasn't wrong. As their case gained momentum, so did public support news outlets continued to cover their story, shining a spotlight on the broader issue of discrimination in air travel. Social media buzzed with hashtags supporting their cause, and letters of encouragement poured in from across the country. One morning, as Lorenzo scrolled through his phone, his eyes widened. "Aunt Belinda, look," he exclaimed, holding out the device. "We're trending again." Belinda leaned over, her eyebrows raising as she read the latest headlines. The story had taken on a life of its own, inspiring others to share their experiences and demand change. "We're not alone anymore," Lorenzo said softly, a mix of awe and determination in his voice. Belinda squeezed his shoulder. "We never were, sweetie. But now everyone else knows it too." As public support grew, so did Lorenzo and Belinda's resolve. They felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that their fight was bigger than just them. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever faced discrimination and injustice. The legal team worked around the clock, bolstered by the testimonies of the passengers who had come forward. Each new piece of evidence strengthened their case, chipping away at the airline's defense. Despite the long hours and emotional toll, Belinda and Lorenzo found strength in each other and in the community that had rallied around them. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it together. The day of the trial arrived, and the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Lorenzo and Belinda stepped out of their car, greeted by a sea of supporters holding signs and chanting words of encouragement. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for position, eager to capture the moment. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The air felt thick with tension as the judge called the court to order. Lorenzo sat behind Belinda, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as his aunt stood tall, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Belinda began, "today we're here to seek justice for a young boy who was wrongfully removed from a flight simply because of how he looked." As Belinda presented their case, She skillfully wove together the evidence the viral video played on a large screen, showing the tense moments when Lorenzo and Belinda were forced off the plane. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as people relived the shocking scene one by one. Passengers who had witnessed the incident took the stand. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of that day, each one reinforcing the unfair treatment Lorenzo and Belinda had endured. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. One witness said, her voice trembling with emotion, that poor boy did nothing wrong. It was clear as day they were being singled out. The airline's defense team tried to argue that it had all been a misunderstanding, that Stephanie had simply been following protocol. But Belinda was ready with precision and poise. She dismantled their arguments one by one. If this was truly about following protocol, Belinda countered, her voice steady and firm. Then why were no other passengers questioned or removed? The video clearly shows my nephew was singled out based on appearance alone, as Belinda spoke. Lorenzo felt a surge of pride. He watched in awe as his aunt, usually so gentle with him, became a force to be reckoned with in the courtroom. Her words were like a shield protecting not just him, but everyone who had ever faced such discrimination. The airline's lawyer tried to interject, but Belinda was always one step ahead. She presented statistics showing a pattern of similar incident, proving that this wasn't an isolated case, but part of a larger problem. This isn't just about one flight or one boy. Belinda said, her voice filled with passion. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of how they look or dress, can travel without fear of discrimination. As the day wore on, it became clear that Belinda's preparation and expertise were paying off. The airline's defense seemed to crumble under her relentless questioning and airtight arguments. As the trial progressed, the moment Lorenzo had been both dreading and anticipating finally arrived. The judge called his name, and a hush fell over the courtroom. Lorenzo took a deep breath, squeezed Belinda's hand for reassurance, and made his way to the witness stand. His small frame seemed even tinier as he settled into the large chair. The bailiff helped him adjust the microphone, and Lorenzo's eyes darted nervously around the room. He caught sight of Belinda, who gave him an encouraging nod. Lorenzo, his lawyer began gently, can you tell us what happened on the day you and your aunt were removed from the flight? Lorenzo's voice quivered at first, but as he began recounting the events, his words grew steadier. He described how excited he had been for the trip, how he had tried to be polite to the elderly woman next to him, and how confused he felt when Stephanie approached them. I didn't understand what I did wrong, Lorenzo said, his voice clear and earnest. I was just trying to get my book from my bag. As he continued, Lorenzo's nervous gave way to a quiet confidence. He spoke about the shame he felt being escorted off the plane, the eyes of strangers following him. It made me feel like I didn't belong, he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, like I was less than everyone else, just because of how I looked. The jury listened intently, many of them visibly moved by Lorenzo's words. Some nodded in understanding, while others looked down, seemingly ashamed of what had happened to this young boy. Lorenzo then spoke about the aftermath, the viral video, the public attention, and the decision to take a stand against discrimination. At first I was scared. He admitted, I didn't want everyone looking at me or talking about me. But then I realized that what happened to us happens to lots of people. And if we don't speak up, nothing will change. His voice grew stronger as he continued. It's not right to judge people based on how they look or what they wear. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. That's why it's so important that we're here today to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. As Lorenzo finished his testimony, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. The sincerity and wisdom in his words had touched everyone present. Even the airline's lawyers looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. The judge thanked Lorenzo for his testimony, and as he stepped down from the stand, he caught sight of Belinda. She was beaming with pride, tears streaming down her face. Lorenzo realized that his words had not only moved the jury but had also given voice to countless others who had faced similar discrimination as the trial reached its climax. Tension filled the courtroom. The airline's lawyers huddled together. Whispering urgently, Lorenzo watched with wide eyes, his hand clutching Belinda's tightly. The judge called for a recess, and everyone held their breath, sensing that something big was about to happen. When court resumed, the airline's lead attorney stood up, his face a mix of resignation and relief. "Your Honor," he began, "we would like to propose a settlement." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Belinda's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but she quickly composed herself. Lorenzo looked up at her, confusion written all over his face. "We believe it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter outside of court," the lawyer continued. "We are prepared to meet all of Miss Belinda's terms." The judge turned to Belinda, counselor. "What are your terms?" Belinda stood up, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, we require 3 things. First, mandatory diversity training for all airline staff from the CEO down to the ground crew. Second, the establishment of scholarships for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. And third, a public apology to Lorenzo and myself for the discrimination we faced." "The airlines," lawyer nodded. "We agree to all these terms, Your Honor." Lorenzo's eyes widened. He tugged on Belinda's sleeve, whispering, "Does this mean we won?" Belinda smiled down at him. "It means they're admitting they were wrong and they're going to make things right." The judge looked pleased. "Very well, we'll take a short recess to formalize the agreement. Court is adjourned for 30 minutes. As people began to file out of the courtroom, Lorenzo and Belinda hugged each other tightly. Tears of relief and joy streamed down their faces. "You did it, Lorenzo," Belinda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your bravery made this happen." Lorenzo shook his head. "We did it together, Aunt Belinda. I couldn't have done any of this without you," as they broke apart. They noticed a crowd of reporters gathering outside the courtroom doors. Belinda squeezed Lorenzo's shoulder. "Are you ready to face them? We can wait if you need a moment." Lorenzo took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and nodded. "I'm ready. Let's go tell everyone that things are going to change." Hand in hand, aunt and nephew walked towards the doors, ready to share their victory with the world. As Lorenzo and Belinda stepped out of the courtroom, they were met with a sea of flashing cameras and eager reporters. The buzz of excitement was palpable in the air. Lorenzo felt a mix of nerves and pride as he faced the crowd, his hands still firmly clasped in Belinda's. "We've reached a settlement," Belinda announced, her voice clear and strong. "The airline has agreed to all our terms, including mandatory diversity training scholarships for minority students in aviation and a public apology." The reporters erupted with questions, but Belinda held up her hand. "What matters most is that real change is coming. This victory isn't just for us, it's for everyone who has ever faced discrimination." Lorenzo nodded, feeling a surge of courage. He stepped forward and spoke into the microphones. "I hope this means no one else will have to go through what we did. It's important to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary." As they made their way through the crowd, Lorenzo felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. The battle they had fought for months was finally over, and they had won. He couldn't help but smile, thinking about all the good that would come from their efforts. Back at their hotel room, Lorenzo and Belinda sat down, both feeling exhausted but elated. "We really did it, didn't we?" Lorenzo asked, still in disbelief. Belinda nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "We sure did, kiddo, and you were amazing. Your bravery made all of this possible." Lorenzo felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had been so nervous about being in the spotlight, but now he realized that sometimes being brave meant doing the right thing, even when it was scary. Over the next few weeks, Lorenzo and Belinda watched as the changes they fought for began to take shape. The airline issued a heartfelt public apology, acknowledging their mistake and promising to do better news. Reports showed airline staff attending diversity training sessions, and there was an announcement about the new scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. Lorenzo felt a sense of pride. Every time he saw these reports, he knew that their fight had made a real difference in the world. It wasn't just about one incident on a plane anymore. It was about changing the way people thought and acted one evening as they watched yet another news segment about the positive changes happening in the airline industry. Lorenzo turned to Belinda. "Do you think we really changed things?" he asked. Belinda smiled warmly at him. "We absolutely did." "Lorenzo, sometimes it takes one brave person to stand up and say this isn't right to start a whole movement. You were that brave person." Lorenzo felt a mix of relief and pride wash over him. He had been through so much, from the scary incident on the plane to the nerve-wracking trial, but now he could see that it had all been worth it. He had made a difference, and that feeling was better than anything he could have imagined. In the weeks following the trial, Lorenzo and Belinda found themselves busier than ever. Their victory had sparked a nationwide conversation about discrimination in travel, and they were determined to keep the momentum going. Lorenzo, once shy and nervous, had blossomed into a confident young speaker. He stood tall as he addressed a packed auditorium at a youth conference, his voice clear and strong. "I never thought I'd be standing here." He began looking out at the sea of eager faces, but sometimes life throws you into situations where you have to choose between staying quiet or speaking up. "I chose to speak up, and it changed everything." As he shared his story, Lorenzo could see the impact his words were having. Eyes widened, heads nodded, and some even wiped away tears. He felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that his experience was touching others. "You don't have to be a grown-up to make a difference." Lorenzo continued, his passion evident in every word. "Each one of you has the power to stand up for what's right. It might be scary, but it's worth it." After his speech, a line of young people formed, all wanting to talk to Lorenzo. He listened patiently as they shared their own experiences with discrimination, offering words of encouragement and support. Belinda watched from the side, her heart swelling with pride. She marveled at how far Lorenzo had come from the nervous boy on that fateful flight to the inspiring young activist he was today. Their advocacy work took them across the country. They visited schools, community centers, and even corporate boardrooms, sharing their story and pushing for change. Lorenzo's youthful perspective resonated with many, especially other kids who saw themselves in him. At a high school in Detroit, Lorenzo spoke to a group of students about the importance of using their voices. Your age doesn't determine your impact. He told them, what matters is your courage to stand up for what's right. After his talk, a shy girl approached him. "I've been bullied because of my hijab," she confided, "but hearing your story makes me want to speak up." Lorenzo smiled warmly at her. "Your voice matters," he said, "and when you use it, you might be surprised at how many people will stand with you as they traveled." Lorenzo and Belinda saw the ripple effects of their work. More people were coming forward with their own stories of discrimination, and companies were taking notice, implementing new policies and training programs through it all. Lorenzo remained grounded. He never forgot the fear and confusion he felt on that airplane, and it fueled his determination to prevent others from experiencing the same thing. As Lorenzo and Belinda approached the gate for their flight going back home, they were greeted with warm smiles and respectful nods from the airline staff. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to their previous experience, and Lorenzo felt a mix of relief and pride wash over him. "Ready for this, champ?" Belinda asked, giving Lorenzo's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Lorenzo nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "More than ready, Aunt Belinda S." As they boarded the plane, the flight attendants welcomed them with genuine kindness. One of them, a young woman with a bright smile, even recognized Lorenzo. "It's an honor to have you on board," she said softly. "What you've done has made a real difference for all of us." Lorenzo blushed slightly, but stood a little taller. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady and clear. They made their way to their seats in First Class A, gesture from the airline that felt less like an apology and more like a recognition of their worth as they settled in. Lorenzo couldn't help but notice the other passengers. There were no suspicious glances or uncomfortable stares. Instead, he saw respect in their eyes, and even a few encouraging smiles as the plane began to taxi down the runway. Lorenzo gazed out the window, his mind wandering over the whirlwind of events that had led to this moment. He thought about the fear and confusion he'd felt during that first flight, the anger and determination that followed, and the countless hours of work they'd put into fighting for justice. The plane lifted off, and as the ground fell away beneath them, Lorenzo felt a sense of lightness that went beyond the physical sensation of flight. He turned to Belinda, who was watching him with a mix of pride and affection. "We did it, didn't we?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Belinda nodded, her eyes shining. "We sure did, sweetheart, and it's just the beginning." As the plane climbed higher, Lorenzo reflected on the support they'd received along the way. He thought of the passengers who had come forward to testify, the lawyers who had worked tirelessly on their case, and the thousands of people across the country who had rallied behind their cause. He realized that their actions had created ripples of change that extended far beyond this single flight. Airlines were implementing new training programs. People were speaking out against discrimination, and conversations about equality were happening in homes and classrooms. Across the nation, Lorenzo felt a swell of gratitude and pride. He knew that the journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done. But as he sat there flying high above the clouds, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had faced injustice head-on and emerged, victorious not just for themselves, but for countless others who would benefit from the changes they'd fought so hard to achieve. If you enjoyed the story of Belinda and Lorenzo, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.